I think one of the other things as well is this part of this letting go of the day-to-day, letting others focus on today so you focus on the future might be a better way of putting it, is that when times get tough, what we observe as well is that most leaders go back to what they know. They go back into the detail.
They're going to revert to type because that's where they feel most comfortable, isn't it?
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hello, I'm Richard from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Ricky from Thinking Focus.
And the question is, in what way do senior leaders need to think differently? This is part of a series that we started in podcast 61, which was in what ways do senior leaders need to be aware of what's happening around them. And we're looking at we're focusing on 4 pillars of leadership. So if you want to go back to 61, you can pick up from where we began on these topics. But as we just said, today's is in what way do senior leaders need to think differently?
Wow. What pillar is this one from, Rich?
So this is about the cognitive pillar of our model. So
okay.
Clearly, obviously, cognitively, you're seeing the link to thinking differently. And I guess what we're talking about here is when we're working with senior leaders, it's the awareness or the recognition that in a senior role, we should be, it's almost that thing, isn't it? Actually, we're now getting paid to think rather than do. And in junior roles, maybe actually what we're doing is we're technically very good at the job. Maybe that's the same in as we get into first management roles. But as we get into middle management and more senior management, it's less about that, and it's more now about our cognitive skills, our ability to solve problems, think strategically, see a bigger picture, create a bigger picture, and see the future, and initiate change or lead change, things like that.
Which is really interesting, because I can't remember at any point in my career anybody telling me that switch has taken place, that now I need to start doing more of the thinking. It's kind of like an osmosis effect. You're expected to just work it out.
Yeah.
And yet we draw most confidence from task-based stuff. We can see something, an output of what we've done, whether that's a report or it's an email or whether it's some business results that we have created with our teams. But nobody ever asks you what you've been thinking. They only ever ask you what you've been up to, what you've been doing.
Yeah. I suppose that's true, isn't it? When you said then about nobody told you that now you needed to think differently. Nobody does, and let's be honest. Most times, somebody gets promoted into a management role, don't they? Because they were good at the job they were doing before.
Yeah, good at the doing.
Yeah, good at the doing. So you then get a role where you're now looking after other people or thinking about the needs of other people, and we observe, don't we, all the time with the customers that we work with and the people that we coach, that their comfort, as you say, Ricky, comes from doing the actual job, through accomplishing a task, through getting a result. That's where the comfort is, and because they know how to do that thing, and there's often some discomfort in the uncertainty, or perhaps not even knowing what strategic thinking is, let alone how to do it.
That's a really good point, because it comes with a almost like this kind of I'm trying to think of the right word, but there's like an aura around strategic thinking. And I remember, going from being in leadership roles to being in board meetings, thinking, before going into them, you're thinking, well, what do they talk about? What? It's like, is this some form of dark art that they have a different conversation to everybody else? And the reality is, it's just the same type of conversation that you'd have in any kind of team meeting. Just the stakes are a little bit higher. Maybe the complexity goes up a notch. But fundamentally, the principles are we focused on the right things? Are we doing the right things? Where else can we, navigate into that gives us an advantage, an edge, a competitive advantage in that context? So, what sort of things play out in this cognitive thinking then, Rich?
Well, you started talking about it there. It's starting to realise that perhaps I've got to let go of some of the day-to-day, which we know is a challenge that we've both felt in our careers and still feel today. and we observe lots of people struggling with. So it's starting to realize you're going to have to let go of the day-to-day when you move into senior leadership. The day-to-day being the detail. You're going to have to get out the detail and accept that others are going to need to make decisions, that you're paying people to make decisions. You're going to have to let other people make more tactical decisions that you need to stay out of and get out the way, create some empowerment. You might have to accept that things are not done in the way that you would always do them. You have to accept that actually progress is better than perfection, and that you might feel a little bit of discomfort for a while because the things that you got your comfort from, or maybe even got a buzz from, are not necessarily the things that you're getting paid to do now. And I think one of the other things as well is this part of this letting go of the day-to-day, letting others focus on today so you focus on the future might be a better way of putting it, is that when times get tough, what we observe as well is that most leaders go back to what they know. They go back into the detail and can micromanage their teams again.
They're going to revert to type because that's where they feel most comfortable, isn't it?
Yeah. And, again, we've both been guilty of that in our careers, haven't we? I'm sure. So that's the first thing. It's about understanding that when you get into the senior role, like you said, the stakes are a bit higher, but you've got to do some different thinking. Other people are now there to do that work that you were doing before. So we've got to let go, and we've got to move more into this bigger picture place when we start to think more about problem solving and thinking about the future.
So as a leader, what we're really saying is their role is more as an enabler, not as a doer. Their job is to identify the direction and be clear about where we're going and why that's important, because that's the purpose is really important. Because that's the bit that keeps us on task when it's important. But actually, as a leader, what we're really there to do is to remove the obstacles, the barriers for the team in order to enable them to execute the strategy that we're trying to accomplish.
I think as well, it's that thing, isn't it? Often we've probably said it, and we hear other people say it, I need some direction. Well, when you start to get into the senior leadership roles, you have to create the direction.
Yeah.
You've got to have the foresight to see, there's that phrase, isn't there? See the past now. So, look ahead, imagine what the future will be like, imagine how that will play out. What will your past then have been? And therefore, how do you navigate around that? You've got to see where your strengths, your weaknesses are, your opportunities, threats, that sort of stuff, and be able to create a strategy, a direction that will help you make the most of what you've got, minimize your issues, trends, systems that you've got. How can you use those? Spot trends, see opportunities, and generally do that horizon scanning. You've got to do that, and that then starts to create the direction. And as you said, Ricky, if you're in a senior leadership team, you'll have colleagues around you can do that with. Some will be stronger than others at doing it, but that now becomes a key and important part of your role is to, as you said, talk about purpose, create direction, and enable people to go after that direction. It's not your job to do the work to get them there, but it is your job to start to create that direction for people.
Well, and the reality is that without some direction, without some clarity of purpose, they're just going to be busy fools, essentially, working on stuff that they think is important. And your job as leader is to calibrate, to keep them on that track, to keep them honest, essentially, in terms of working on the right things. And there's a real sense of trust that needs to play out here, because I think you listed some things early on around accepting that things may not be done the way that you would do them.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite hard for some people to let go, particularly if they were subject matter experts that have been promoted into a particular role. Yeah, but there's an easier way of doing it. There's a simpler way of doing it. And what they're really saying is there's a different way of doing it, because other people might emerge with what's more effective for them, and imposing your expectations, your will on them actually might in reality slow them down. And that means you're back in the detail. You're back in that day-to-day stuff that's going to cause you effectively to do more doing and not doing more thinking.
Yeah, no, and I think it's almost you get if you're in a senior leadership position, some of the development, the training, the help you need is in problem solving. It is in how to think strategically. It is in seeing the future before it's happened. That's the sort of the development you need. But you also need that development, you've just said, Ricky, in letting go.
Yes.
How do I let go of things that have become really habitual for me, that I've been on top of and doing for years and years and years, that now no longer are my job to do? And I might see somebody else doing it and feel they're not doing it as well as I could. How do I cope with that? Because that's the stuff you have got to cope with. Because we know if I lean over you and tell you how to do what you're doing all day long, actually I turn off any creativity, any learning, any reflection, anything in you. You become a robot, probably one that's a robot that's fed up, and will eventually just leave and go do something else. So that's the development that's required. And when we talk about this pillar, it's starting to help senior leaders realize that those habits, those functions, those things that they've done for years and years are not the things that are going to support them to do a senior role effectively.
I would agree with that. I think what we're really saying here is you need to develop those skills that you've just highlighted around, the foresight, the connections, the trends, the horizon scanner. You've got to develop those, but you've also got to develop the comfort and confidence, the reassurance. In other words, you've got to develop your people around you to be able to pick the baton up that you once carried and run with that and enable them, support them, coach them to do that while you create time to do the other things, the things that you're now paid and expected to do.
You talked about trust, didn't you, before?
I did, yeah.
Building trust in people. And, some of the coaching calls I've had over the last year, a couple come to mind where people have worked for quite demanding bosses, and they've said, how do I get him or her off my back? One of the conversations I remember exploring in one of those was, well, what are the things that this particular boss needs comfort in? What are the things that they need to know you're on top of, that therefore they will leave you alone? Because obviously, if they're not leaving you alone, what they're saying is, I'm not comfortable that you're on top of it, that you've got it. And that, as a senior leader, is something worth exploring with your team, which is to say, hey, look, here are the 4 or 5, 6 things, whatever the number is, I need comfort in every week, every month, that we're on top of. And if you can demonstrate to me that we're doing that, I can give you more breathing space. Because if you don't have that conversation, you're going to find yourself diving into, why have they not done it how I did it, and that sort of stuff.
Well, we're all we all have masters to serve, don't we? So what you'll find is if our boss, our line manager, whoever that may be, and that could be the chief executive, it could be the board of directors if I am the chief executive. But if they're grilling me on certain things, they're basically saying they're not necessarily either clear on what we're doing or why, and the results that we're getting, and therefore they're going to ask more questions. And the one thing any leader doesn't want to look is exposed. They don't want to look like they don't have the answers to the questions. And the reality is you can't have the answers to all the questions all of the time. And that's where you get this kind of behavior that will play out, where leaders will be asking more what we would deem as a report as, well, I've got that. Why are you asking me that? And it's because sometimes we have to imagine what it's like to sit in the seat of our boss and go, well, actually, why are they asking these questions? What are they getting pressured on? Or is it just that's the way they are? And they do ultimately need reassurance and confidence that we're on it, because either for themselves or because they have to represent that at another meeting, whether that be a board meeting or with the other leaders within the organization. And I think it's this sense of, I don't want to look exposed, causes probably to go for more detail than perhaps we should sometimes.
Yeah, and I think, you don't want to look exposed, so you get further and further into the detail. You get more caught up in the things.
It's a vicious cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And when we say you've got to let go, we're not saying you let go and you don't pay any attention to it. What we're saying is you have to find a way with your people that you can pay just enough attention to it to give them the space that they need to go and work on it, do it, deliver it, make it happen, while you need to spend more time on the future, on thinking differently, on creating direction, on purpose, on empowering people, on motivating people. I mean, I remember, Ricky, a certain person you and I worked with a number of years ago in a certain sportswear company that we worked with. And this guy was a really dynamic leader, but he used to do something. I'm going back a number of years, so pre-pandemic, obviously. But he used to say that sort of 2:30 every day, he called it. He went on his biscuit hunt, and he used to go round the entire building. And he said he was going looking for biscuits, right? But of course he wasn't. He was going round and he'd just stand and he'd talk to people. And of course he would always start with, what biscuits have we got on this department? But while he was there eating biscuits, he'd find all sorts of things out. And when I talked to him about it, he said, I see one of the key bits of my role as the leader of this operation in the UK is to talk about why we're doing what we're doing to people and to motivate people. And he saw that. Now, he was in the detail with other things. This guy wasn't perfect. But he did understand that he'd got to connect people all the time to the strategy, to the purpose, and to motivate them. And he saw that as a daily task. And I remember thinking that was, and he called it his biscuit hunt. I remember thinking, what a really good way of putting it. What he was saying was, I'm going to go talk to people today and make sure we're all lined up.
But and I think that's brilliant, because he's managed to kind of develop a strategy for him in order to go and press the flesh, understand what's going on. So he wouldn't just do the motivational bit and reinforce, the strategy, the purpose. What he would also do is he would start to identify what problems are getting in the way, what challenges and issues. Because when you talk to people in that way, you become more approachable, you become more open, they are then more willing to share and give you what you really need to know. And that effectively, we need to be good as leaders. This was something I heard from a client recently. We need to be good at receiving bad news, because if we're not, the bad news still exists, but we don't know about it because nobody's prepared to tell us. Yeah. So what this guy had done essentially would worked our way to receive those things, the good, bad, and the ugly. And therefore that enabled him to start thinking about what's the impact, thinking about what's that going to do for our future, revenues, performance, whatever it might be. And he could start to think about that in context of, so what do we need to change to improve then? How do we create some incremental opportunities to improve our business? And I think, this all comes about because he separated the doing. So he's not taking responsibility. What he's doing is giving his team the accountability, responsibility for doing. What he wants to know is, how do I make your job easier? How do I make sure you understand we're still on the same track and we're still doing it for the same reasons? And that kind of integrates. And what he's done then is freed himself up to do all the things we've talked about as important. The foresight element of it, that making connections around what's going on over here with what's going on over there, in order to go, how do we make the system, in inverted commas, more effective than it is today?
Thank you, Ricky. I thought you summed that up really well. So that was about the cognitive pillar of our leadership model. If you want more information about the model itself, we'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. And you can also, go to our website and have a look there. There'll be more information there as well.
Next time on The Question Is.
If you'd like to know more about our Pillars of Leadership model, you can check it out on our website at www.thinkingfocus.com/pillars of leadership. That's pillars-of leadership.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organisation, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.